Hellblazer podcast.
Hey everybody, before we get started, just wanted to let you know that this is the free version of the podcast, and all that means is that this is way behind where I'm at in Patreon. So if you're liking what you're hearing and you need more John Constantine in your life, then definitely go to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you get access to the full library of every issue that I've done so far. And you also get access to the main Planes, Trains, and Comic Books podcast if you're interested in that as well. And once again, you can get that at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into the issue. Today we are reading issue number 24, and just a little catch up of what happened last time. Constantine went to go visit his old buddy Jehoshaphat O'Flynn, who is the guy that he sells all his like occultic artifacts and relics to whenever he needs money. So of course he needed money because of the events that happened in Fear Machine. So when he went to visit his friend, it turns out that his friend was on the run from fairy tale creatures like Tall Tales and other literary characters like Sherlock Holmes or Peter Pan and those kind of people, because it turns out that Jehoshaphat himself was one of those. And so while John was visiting him, that is when the other fairy tale creatures attacked and proceeded to chase John and Jehoshaphat all over London until eventually they captured his friend and took him away to Fairy Tale Prison. And that is where we left off. So we start on this issue on the cover, of course. We see on the top there is a selection of different butcher knives, and one of them is super bloody. And then there's a picture of someone that has been cut up into three pieces and is like taped to a wall. Very serial killer-ish. And then we see a house and a man's face kind of coming out of the house as he holds up his bloody hands, and he looks horrified. And we see this issue is written by Jamie Delano and with art by Rob Tyner. And we start off on the first page with a nice little family in the suburbs, I'm assuming of London. I don't know much about the geography of Britain. So we see this nice house, and we zoom in on the inside, and we see a woman named Mrs. Cherry. And she's just going through her day-to-day, taking care of a baby and also like cleaning the house and stuff as she watches her husband outside while he does some gardening. And then she's kind of like, I haven't heard my children crying or saying anything for a while. I should go check on them. So she goes up the stairs, up to the kids' room, and then we cut outside to where her husband is working in the garden, and he's talking to the neighbor, and they're just kind of chit-chatting it up about how awesome their families are and how well life is going and whatnot. And while they're talking, the husband sees smoke or steam, I think it is, coming out of the kitchen, because before the wife went up the stairs to check on the children, she was making tea. And so I guess the kettle is just going off and someone's steam is filling the kitchen, that it's coming outside. So the husband comes in, and he thinks that's pretty weird that she would leave the kettle on and not take it off as it's whistling and everything. So he goes up and he starts calling her name. He's like, Helen? And then he goes towards the kids' rooms and he's like, Emma? Adam? And he opens the door, and we can see on the inside of the door as he opens it that it's all bloody. And then he collapses to his knees as he sees his wife and children have been murdered in the children's room. And there's blood all over the place, and it looks like maybe the bodies were staged because the children are in the mother's arms, but they're all like sitting in a chair. And on this page, we also see that the name of this story arc is called The Family Man. And then we cut to another family named the Lucas family, and the husband is getting ready for work. He's up before everybody else, and as he puts on his work clothes, he's listening to the radio, and the program he's listening to is the news, and they are talking about how a funeral will take place today for Miss Helen Cherry and her children, Adam and Emma, who were brutally slain in their Cambridge home while husband and father Robert chatted to a neighbor in the garden. So he kind of pauses as he hears this, and he's putting on his socks and stuff and getting ready to go. And he decides that today he is not going to go to work. He's going to stay at home and stay close with his loved ones, because at the end of that broadcast, he hears that police sources say that the killer's methods lead them to suspect links with other multiple deaths attributed to the murderer dubbed the Family Man. And then we leave the Lucas house and cut to Jehoshaphat O'Flynn's house where we were at last issue. And it turns out Constantine, after his friend got arrested by the fairy tale people, decided he was going to just stay at his friend's house because his friend would want him to stay there, he says. He's like trying to justify it in his mind. He says, "We've got history, Jerry and me. I've done him plenty of favors in the past. So I was sure he wouldn't object if I made myself at home." So he's just going around kind of poking his nose in all of Jerry's things. And I should mention that that is what Constantine calls him. That's his nickname for him, Jerry. So if I mention Jerry from now on, that's Jehoshaphat's other name. So like I said, Constantine's going around his house and he says, "It's only the people with secrets who are interesting. At first, I was only going to hang out here for a little while, maybe borrow a few collectibles to sell for stake money, but then I found the safe. I've resisted the temptation for 2 whole days, but I've spent all the loose change I could find and I'm getting a bit peckish. And anyway, I can always leave an IOU just in case he ever comes back." So John is literally pulling a Dumb and Dumber here, where he's putting IOUs in place of the cash, and that's how much of an asshole he is to his friend. So of course he can just use magic to open up the safe, and he decides to use some kind of divining thing where he can use this like pendulum swinging, kind of like something you'd use to hypnotize someone, and it's like a coin on a rope, and I guess he puts it in front of the lock, and as he turns the knob, he says the numbers out loud, and whichever one moves the pendulum towards the number, that's how he knows it's correct. So he opens it, and he's very surprised what he finds. He finds a whole bunch of money, but he also finds a bunch of drugs and a bunch of other paperwork. So John's very surprised, like I said, and he's like, "There's nothing quite like the buzz you get from using magic to open secret doors. Although, the quantity of drugs and money that the safe contains could go a long way towards synthesizing it, or getting you 20 years with no remission." So John proceeds to take out all the money and count it, and the total comes to 95,000 pounds. And just as he finishes with the counting of that, all of a sudden the doorbell begins to ring, and he's just freaked out because, there's cocaine or whatever in the safe, and he's like, "Oh my God, it's the cops." So he takes the cocaine and he runs to the toilet and he cuts it open and flushes it all down. And then he runs down to the door to answer. And when he opens the door, he finds a nice old man who's just standing there. And they exchange pleasantries, but basically this old man is looking for Mr. O'Flynn, who they have some kind of business arrangement. And so John kind of has to make up a lie on the spot and says, "Well, yeah, I'm sorry, but he's not here. He was called away because of a sick relative." And then the old man tells John that, he's sorry for Mr. O'Flynn, but he had to take the bus station and it's such a long walk, and if John wouldn't mind letting him come in and catch his breath for a moment. And John agrees to this, so he lets the old man in. And the house is still like in ruins from when the big bad wolf blew in the windows and all that. So there's like rooms that are just totally scattered with old artifacts and curtains and dust and everything that has never been picked up. So Constantine is like apologizing, but the old man's like, "Don't worry about it. Why don't we sit down and have a drink? Because Jehoshaphat O'Flynn always has the best booze." So they sit down, and Constantine's like, "Yeah, I'm actually good. I'm not going to drink." But the old man does take a drink, and in order to get to the bottle, he kind of has to reach under some rubble, and Constantine's like, "Watch out, it's not very safe over there." But the old man, he grabbed the bottle, he's not scared, and he says, "Safety is a relative concept, Mr. Constantine. It needs risk to define it." And then he proceeds to get all philosophical about the duality of nature and what is happiness without the knowledge of its lack, or good without evil. Like basically, you can't have good without bad, because then the good doesn't mean anything and the bad doesn't mean anything. And John's like, "I guess I kind of agree with that. I get what you're saying." And then the old man's like, "Well, sorry I'm talking so much." And Constantine's like, "Well, no, don't worry about it, because it's nice to have someone to talk to. I don't talk to people very often like this." And then the old man's like, "Well, either way, I still have to go. But I wonder, though, this appointment I have with Mr. O'Flynn was of some long standing. We enjoy a periodic but inconsequential trade in trivia. I wonder there, under the blackbird statue, would you be so kind?" And then Constantine reaches underneath this bird statue, and there just happens to be an envelope there. And so he gives the envelope to the old man, and then the old man's like, "Okay, here's my part of that trade." And he gives John a package and says, "Make sure you give this to Mr. O'Flynn when he gets back." And John asks him, okay, I will, but what's the name I should tell him who gave him this package? And the old man hands John his card, and it says H. Familiaris Esquire on it. And then the old man's like, hey, before I leave, do you mind if I use your restroom? And John's like, no problem. So the old man gives John the envelope back and uses the restroom. And then, of course, John being John, he starts looking into the envelope and undoes the little manila folder flap and looks inside. And he sees that there's a picture of a family, and it just so happens that their name is the Lucases. And that's the family of the man who did not leave his house today from earlier in the issue. And it has their names and how old they are. And we don't really know anything else, but it has their address on it as well. And then John quickly puts that information back into the envelope. And as the old man comes out of the restroom, John's like, all right, well, have a good day then. And he sends the man out. And the man even thanks Constantine for a good conversation and cooperating with the old man's requests. So after the old man leaves, John decides, look, this house has too much activity, basically. O'Flynn has too many contacts and people calling him and callers trying to get into his house. So John's like, this isn't a good place to stay after all. He's going to get out of there. So he gets a bag and he starts loading the money in it. And one thing I'm going to mention, and I'm not sure if it actually means anything or is going to go anywhere, but there are animals like a cat in the house that seems to be watching John very closely. So they make it seem like this cat is, keeping eyes on him for someone or something, maybe foreshadowing something that's going to happen, but I'm not sure. There was also a bug in the safe, like a little, I don't know if it's a cockroach or something, that also looked to be watching Constantine when he first opened the safe. So I'm not sure if there's some kind of weird mystical thing happening with the animals, but just figured I'd mention it because it doesn't come into play in this issue, but maybe in another issue later it will. So like I said, John is loading up the money in a bag, and then he's just kind of looking around for other stuff that might be useful. And one of the things he finds is Jerry O'Brien's address book. And that's interesting to him because, Jerry knew a lot of influential and powerful people that, maybe now John would have their contact info or something. But it ends up just being a money ledger of people who owe Jerry money and also money that he owes to people, I guess. And while John's looking at this, he kind of has a flashback of him and Jerry hanging out when they were younger, and how Jerry would just get drunk and start dancing on the London Bridge on the edge of it, and John had to pull him off, and then the cops came and tried to arrest Jerry, and John thinks to himself about this memory. He was a wild man, and it was hard to see through that. But once you did, there was a pathos there, a vulnerability that made you love him. But unfortunately, Jerry had a fatal flaw, and that was the addict's curse, he says. And he continues, we all know that craving. Drugs, gambling, sex, religion, secrecy. But with Jerry, it was a bit more complicated. His obsession was with trying to feed those bottomless pits of need. He was addicted to trade, the urgent, intravenous rush of supply to demand. So basically, Jerry was just addicted to the idea of the trade. So if anyone came to him with any kind of opportunity for trade, it was like the making of the deal gave him a rush or something. So just the ability to come to a deal is what Jerry was addicted to. And John finishes his thoughts about his friend by saying, it doesn't really matter when it comes down to it. He was my friend and I'll miss him. And then he continues to look through that book and he sees some initials by some very, very large numbers. And those initials are RH. He's like, that's kind of weird. And then as he looks through the documents in the safe more, he finds a magazine ad that says, there's a new TV game show called Happy Families. Enter your family for this fantastic family show and you can win. And then it cuts it off. So John's like, what's Jerry doing with this? That's kind of weird. And then there's a manila envelope with a bunch of replies and photos to that ad. And they look kind of familiar to him because they look exactly like the information that was in the envelope that the old man got from him earlier. And all this kind of throws John for a loop. And he's kind of like, why would Jerry have all this stuff around, like this weird TV family game show thing? And basically, it's just not adding up in his head. So John thinks about it for a while and he says to himself, I know a can of worms when I see one, but the thrill of squirming when you open them is irresistible, or at least it is to me. So he begins to look around more and finds more books pertaining to that stuff with the families. And he finds a journal as well, and he starts reading from that journal. And it says, March 87, RH Phones. Says he got my number from Scuzz Video Maker in Holland. I thought I knew every kind of collector. He says he's been reading about serial killers, wants me to get him a souvenir of the Surrey Stalker. Sounds like an unhealthy bastard. I say I'll see what I can do. And then it continues, April 87. It was easy. I got him an autographed copy of The Confession from a bent police psychiatrist. September 87. RH has got the bug. I make approaches to the mother of Hacksaw Harry. He was sentenced last week and acquired the carpentry set she bought him for his 10th birthday. January 88. Pulled a brilliant stroke and got one of the 6-inch nails the hammer of God used to crucify those boys. And I've been promised a bootleg of one of the choir boys' lullabies. RH can't get enough. March 88. RH hits me with another big one. He wants something from a killer who's still at large. I'm sick with revulsion and excitement. What a coup. If only I dared. November 88. I've done it. Made contact with FM. He finally answered my personal ad and phoned. He says he's interested, but what's in it for him? He doesn't want money. December 88. Success. FM is brilliant, utterly terrifying, but only if you know. You'd never suspect. After he left, I was sick for an hour, but there's no going back now. The deal was mutually beneficial, a stroke of pure genius. Just a matter of making the right deal. So RH gives me money for the souvenirs from FM, and I supply the one thing a serial killer really needs. And then John says the last word out loud, and that last word is victims. And the whole time John was reading these passages from the diary, we're getting a bunch of panels of a cat outside, the one that was kind of watching Constantine before, and it is stalking all these birds and murdering them, just tearing them apart and just having a blast murdering all these little birds. So then John, after he realizes what his friend has been up to, he's like, Jerry, you bastard. What have you done? Drugs I can understand. That's a legitimate desire to a point. Free will and all that. Prostitution? I wouldn't have put it past him. I'd give him a bollocking, but I suppose I'd live with it. But procurement of murder. Bastard. And then as he says that, all of a sudden the phone begins to ring, and John goes downstairs and finds the old-timey phone. It's one of those ones with the long stem that you talk into, and then there's a separate earpiece that you hold up to your ear. And while John is walking down to get the phone, he's thinking, I can't think of a serial killer with the initials FM, but I can't think of anything. I can't believe he'd do it. He was my friend. And then John answers the phone, and someone says, Hackett Video Productions, I have a call for you. Will you please hold? And then someone comes on the line and says, Jerry, how are they hanging? Reed Hackett here. Any news? It's been a week since he did the last one. I've got the hots for my parcel. Has he been in yet? And John's just saying like one word at a time. He's just like, what? Who? And so Reed Hackett's saying, have you been drinking, boy? Who do you think I'm talking about? The old man, our beloved Mr. Homo Familiaris, the family man. And at that moment, John realizes who he's talking about. He's talking about the old man who he just gave the information of a family to and got a package in return. So John's like, oh my God, that was the murderer. And so he's just like, please no, the old man, he left the parcel. I gave him the address. Oh God. And then he looks at the parcel next to him, just happens to be on the table. And he opens it and he sees it's a little sippy cup for a kid. And then, but it's full of something. So he starts shaking it, and then he goes to like twist off the top. And as he does, blood spills all out of it and gets all over his hands and his shirt and everything. And he's super freaked out. So he just immediately throws that thing and all the money and everything into a big pile with a bunch of wood that was around the house. And he lights it on fire. And he yells bastard as he throws an alcoholic beverage into the fire to make it go more. And he even breaks a natural gas pipe that's in the house so it will explode. And John thinks to himself, make a fire, create a heat to cauterize the pain. Their address, I'll go there, I'll try to put it right. I'll do the best I can, but in my frozen heart, I know I'm too late. And somewhere, someone's world explodes. And as he says that, the house behind him totally blows up. And then we cut to the Lucas family, who are sitting together on the couch in their living room watching TV. And the doorbell rings, and Mr. Lucas stands up to answer the door. And the narration says, Peter Lucas is contented. He's had a nice day today. He's glad he didn't go to work. It's good to have his family close around him. It's too easy to get wrapped up in work and forget why you're doing it. June, Mark, and Lucy, they were what made it all worthwhile. It may not suit everyone, but he's glad to be a family man. And then Mr. Lucas reaches for the handle of his front door, and as he opens it, he sees a nice old man who says, "Good evening, sir. I wonder if you could assist me." And that is the end of the issue. So if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.